What's good, boys? Welcome to Based Or Cringe, Bloomburrow edition, where we review Commander Precons and ask the question, are these decks based or are they cringe? Together, we are going to review every Commander Precon deck from Bloomburrow and upgrade them the best way possible and keep budget in mind so that you can have a nice, powerful deck right out of the box. With that out of the way, let's just jump into it. First up, we got Animated Army, led by Bellow, Bard of the Brambles. 1 red-green for a 3/3 legendary raccoon bard creature. During your turn, each non-equipment, artifact, and non-aura enchantment you control mana value 4 or greater is a 4/4 elemental creature in addition to other types and has indestructible, haste, and whenever this creature is coming to a player, draw a card. Bellow as a commander is actually like kind of nuts. Bellow will give you a ton of advantage. He can give you so much card draw. He can create so much just power on the board. The only downside of Bellow, I think, is that if you build really hard into the idea of trying to make these inanimate artifacts and enchantments animate and let them deal damage, the deck will fall apart if Bellow is not protected well. And it honestly makes me kind of wish Bellow had Ward. Bellow seems like a commander design to me that I actually think should have Ward as opposed to Tivit, where it's just a self-contained value engine. I think Bellow could have done fine with a simple Ward 1. That would have been much appreciated in my opinion. But Bellow aside, y'all, this deck is so weird. So Bellow tells you that he cares about artifacts and enchantments with high mana value, so he can make them into creatures and let you draw cards off of them. The deck then proceeds to have like 21 creatures that don't seem to care about artifacts or enchantments at all. There's only what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 artifacts that can even become animate with Bellow, and then every enchantment -1 with Gross Uprising can get animate as well. And then the creature suite is just this like what is happening? There's Bright Cat Badger, which cares about fungus and sapperlings. There's an Atali and a Galta in here for some reason. There's a Goreclaw as well, which I don't understand why, because Goreclaw only reduces the cost of like 10 creatures in this deck. There's a Teapot Slinger. What is this? Why is this here, dude? Wait. Oh my god. There's a Tendershoot Dryad. Don't get me wrong, this card's great. It can make a lot of power really fast, but again, it just has nothing to do with artifacts or enchantments at all. Like, Bellow says he cares about artifacts and enchantments of high mana value, but then there's so many cards in this deck that just seem to be here as these, like, self-contained good stuff cards. Like Galta. Yeah, Galta can be a big fat creature for 2 mana, but that doesn't have anything to do with artifacts or enchantments. The deck also seems to have this, like, strange treasure sub-theme. Alchemist Talent gives you benefits for casting spells of treasure. Reign of Riches is in here, giving you Cascade for casting spells of treasure. All in all, this deck just seems very misguided, and it's very strange because this is the only precon out of the 4 that seems to, like, not know what it actually wants. And furthermore, it hurts that Bellow is just one of those commanders where if you lean too much into him, the deck can quickly begin to fall behind if you can't stick him on the board. Is Bellow based or cringe? I'm not sure, honestly. This is honestly really hard to say. Part of me wants to say cringe simply due to how, like, weird and sporadic this deck list is. Like, there's 20 creatures that seem to have nothing to do with artifacts or enchantments at all. But then again, like, the way that the deck is built, I don't think is a fair way to judge Bellow himself. I do kind of wish Bellow had Ward 1, but green is a very good color at protecting its own permanence. So I don't think it's impossible to keep Bellow alive in your deck so that you can consistently have your big mana value artifacts and enchantments become creatures to draw cards. And Bellow will draw you a ton of cards. He can easily draw you 4 or 5 cards a turn if you're allowed to stick multiple big mana value stuff into play. I'm gonna say Bellow is base, but I think it's very close, and had Bellow cost 4 or 5 even, he probably would be considered cringe for me. But with that out of the way, let's look at what an Animated Army upgrade deck would look like. So, full disclosure, because of how just strangely built this deck is, if it were up to me, I would actually prefer to make Wild Seer, Scouring Maw the face commander. Giving your enchantment spells from your hand Cascade gives you a much easier, streamlined deck building process where you can be Gruul Enchantress, but you don't need Wild Seer for the deck to work. Bellow has to stick on the field in order for your artifacts and enchantments to actually hit people and draw you cards. The deck can quickly begin to fall apart if Bellow is not on the field consistently. Whereas Wild Seer is just a nice, appreciated value engine for your enchantments, should he manage to stick on the field. The problem with making Wild Seer the commander is that if I were to do that, I would have to cut almost every card in this deck that's not an enchantment. And at that point, just buy Wild Seer by himself and just make your own deck. So we are going to be upgrading the deck based on Bellow. We're going to try and make sure Bellow can stay on the field consistently. We're going to try and make sure that Bellow can animate lots of things to get in for lots of damage, draw you lots of cards, and overall really lean into the theme of making the inanimate animate and smack people in the face. So first off, let's get into cuts. What's hilarious about this deck is that I counted like 25 ramp sources. But then the biggest spell you have in this deck is like a few 6-drops. There's Galta too, I guess, but Galta is not going to cost 12. Galta is not going to cost 12. Do not kid yourself. So we actually cut a few ramp because I just don't think 25 ramp is really that necessary. And furthermore, we cut the worst ramp of the deck. Bright Cat Badger is just weird. Burnish Heart is overcosted for today's board commander. Goreclaw only reduced the cost of like 10 cards in the deck to begin with, and we cut even more creatures that she did reduce the cost of, so it just made sense to cut her as well. Manowar Loam Speaker and Wandertail Mentor. 2-mana dorks are terrible unless they're like Bloom Tender, which are nuts, obviously. Path of Discovery and Outpost Siege are just a little too expensive for what they do. Outpost Siege is just like the worst Phyrexian Arena you've ever seen, and Path of Discovery gives you a +1/+1 encounter on creatures, or it might draw you a card. And then there's just some weird things like Spine of Ishsat, Star Storm, Teapot Slinger, cards that just are strange and not good. Harmonize, I don't think there is any reason to be playing this nowadays in Commander. You have such better options for card draw in Green nowadays with all these silly draw cards, either creature's power, which almost always ends up being like 8, 9, 10 cards. There's just no reason, in my opinion, to be playing these nowadays. Tender Shoot Dryad, if you wanted to keep this in, it's probably fine. The Tender Shoot Dryad can make you a lot of power very quickly if it's not dealt with, but at the end of the day, Dryad doesn't really give us any synergy with Bellow or artifacts or enchantments, so we cut it. Evercoat Ursign, this card is also not terrible, but I think the potential blowout of exiling 2 of your own cards and then having Ursign die immediately, therefore you just like, I don't know, double extracted yourself, is just awful. Again, not the worst card. If you want to keep it, it's probably fine. Grothama All Devouring, I see what they were trying to do here. Because your animated artifacts and enchantments are indestructible with Bellow on the board, Grothama, you should be able to kill Grothama by yourself immediately and not lose any permanence on your board, therefore drawing lots of cards. The issue is that you open yourself to a blowout by having Bellow die on the spot once you cast Grothama. If someone does that, then your opponents are open to the possibility of being able to kill Grothama themselves, and you give them card draw, which is not great. And then Grumgully Generous is just not good. 3-mana anthems are bad, even if they are counter-based, in my opinion. And once again, it just has no synergy. Oh, and we also cut Timbergorge, Shivan Oasis, and Gruul Guildgate, because this amount of tap lands is not necessary. You have so many basics, just cut them. Tap lands will hurt you. Just cut them and add basics. All in all, we just cut cards that were a little too inefficient, a little too costly, or just didn't synergize well at all with the deck. And in place, we added a lot of stuff, actually. We're adding 3 basics for the 3 tap lands we cut, because they're just, you don't need to be super heavy on non-basic in this deck. You're 2 colors. You're fine. We're adding a Goblin Anarchomancer, because having a Ruby and Emerald Medallion on a nice 2-drop creature is just amazing. We reinforced the deck's treasure theme with Professional Facebreaker, Horde Hauler, and Treasure Map. as well as Stimulus Package, and there I'm back again. Just more cards that produce treasure and give you benefits for having said treasure. Stimulus Package can actually let you sack treasures to make a bunch of 1/1 citizen creatures, which can either be chump blockers or, I guess, swingers if you want to swing with 1/1s. And also it's a 4-drop, so it becomes a creature if Bell's on the field. Facebreaker can give you card advantage, and ramps you as well by making treasure. Thunderfoot, Baloth, and Glorious Sunrise are 2 cards that give you anthems to your whole board, allowing you to get in there. Also, I think the trample is a big deal. Your 4/4 enchantments and artifacts will not draw you cards unless they actually connect to the face. So I think giving them trample is actually a huge deal and a huge benefit. Sky Sovereign is just a nice little synergy piece. It's a vehicle that with flying that lets you bolt things every turn, as well as drawing you cards every turn probably due to the flying. So it's just a nice little synergy with Bellow there. Waking the Trolls and Sandworm Convergence can totally just get you a ton of board pressure if not dealt with. Waking the Trolls being land removal and land ramp, as well as making you a ton of 4/4s once the final chapter resolves. Also, it's a 6-drop, so Bellow will turn it into a creature. The World spell will allow you to cheat out a couple of expensive permanents, and then you can dig for said expensive permanents with the first 2 chapters. Asceticism, Tyvar Stand, and Collective Resistance all serve to protect Bellow, with Resistance serving as double duty by also being able to be removable as well if you escalate it. And then Shamanic Revelation can just be amazing card draw, and you can gain, honestly, a lot of life with this thing. Bellow does make your enchantments and artifacts into 4/4s, so you can totally gain like 20 life with this thing, which I feel like almost never happens because people who cast this usually are casting it in like token decks that aren't able to make lots of 4/4s. And then Return of the Wild Speaker being a way to pump your board at instant speed should you decide you don't actually want the card draw right now. Glorious Sunrise is just, in my experience, this awesome like Swiss Army knife. It gives you card draw, it ramps you, or it gives your board +1/+1 trample. As I mentioned before, the trample was huge with your 4/4 enchantments that Bellow animates, because being able to get in there guaranteed is massive for card draw sake. It can also gain you some life, I guess, if you ever want to do that, which you probably don't. With these upgrades, I think the deck gets a lot more finishing power. You get a lot more card advantage, and overall, the deck just, I think, synergizes a lot better together. We reinforce that treasure sub-theme. We have more cards to protect Bellow. We have multiple ways to buff our board and give them trample. That way our 4/4 enchantments and artifacts can actually get in there guaranteed and start drawing us multiple cards, even if our opponents decide to chump block them. Overall, I think these upgrades just allow the deck to close the game a lot faster, and just, again, helps Bellow really feel like this more synergistic deck rather than this just weird gruel good stuff pile. Next up, we got Family Matters, led by Zinnia Valley's Voice. Simple, nice, and clean, blue, red, white, 3 mana commander. No yucky cringe extra generic tacked on there. Nope, it's just a nice, clean, blue, red, white. Love that. Zinnia Valley's Voice, blue, red, white for a legendary 1/3 bird bard creature. Bird Bard, of course, Bird Bard. Flying, Zinnia Valley's Voice is +X+O, where X is the number of other creatures you control with base power 1, and then Zinnia gives all of your creature spells offspring 2. So you can pay 2 as you cast them to make a copy of said creatures, but they are 1/1s instead of their base power and toughnesses. This deck is honestly pretty solid. There's a couple of weird selections. I think I'd say this deck's biggest issue is that there's just cards in here that you might think are good at first, but when you actually like take into account just how much mana it would cost to do these things, you realize that it's not really that good. Take, for example, Cloud Blazer, right? 5 mana, 2/2 flyer, gain to life, draw 2 cards, right? Oh, but with Zinnia, you can pay an extra 2 mana, a total of 7 to get a 2/2 flyer and a 1/1 flyer and draw 4 cards. Listen to me. Listen to me, alright? Listen to me. My sweet summer child, okay? Paying 7 mana at sorcery speed to draw 4 cards is not good. It's not. And the deck has so many cards like this. Circuit Mender. I'm not paying 5 mana for some 2/3s that will draw a card when they leave the field. Illusory Ambusher. I have 35 creatures and 5 instants. I am not a deck that is able to pass holding up 5 mana, or god forbid 7, to offspring this thing at instant speed. Inspiring Overseer. 5 mana for a 2/1 and a 1/1 to draw 2 cards and gain 2 life is not good. Thopter Engineer, a 3 mana 1/3 that enters the 1/1. Paying 5 mana for 3 1/1s to them being a flyer and a 1/3 is not good. Artifact creatures have haste? What artifact creatures? There's only a Solemn Simulacrum and a Circuit Mender and an Angel of the Ruins as an artifact creature. That's it. There's no synergy with the artifact haste thing on her. Why is she here? To top it all off, this deck's mana base is so bad. Oh my god. I counted like 14 tap lands in this deck, which is, what, almost half of the deck at that point? Between Guild Gates and the dual lands that just happen to have land types, Mystic Monastery, temples, and even the strictly worse gates with like Stone Quarry, this deck's mana base will absolutely hurt you. There will be times where you could make good plays, but you can't because half of your deck is horrible tap lands. I actually think Zinnia herself is a great commander. It's a nice, clean mana cost. 3 is cheap. She's an enabler for your deck, but she doesn't have to exist because you don't have to offspring your creatures in order to survive. At its core, the deck is just this, like, low power matters deck, which is fine. You don't have to have Zinnia at all in order for that theme to work. Plus, Zinnia can become a finisher herself if you get enough 1/1s, because she grows with the number of 1 power creatures you have. All things considered, I gotta say, Zinnia Valley's Voice, you get a incredible based from me. Love you, Zinnia. Honestly, it might be one of, if not my favorite commander from the whole set, commander and base set. Now let's see what an upgrade of this deck would look like. So first off, immediately, we already cut the Guild Gates and the strictly worse Guild Gates with like Meandering River, Stone Quarry, and Highland Lake. And we just added 6 basics. The deck only had 2 of each basic to begin with. You can go to 4 basics of each, you'll be fine, and that should absolutely help the tap land problem this deck has, and should make it nowhere near as bad. You might still have some issues here and there, but this alone should make it nowhere near as debilitating, where almost every other land you play is a tap land. Once again, we just cut a lot of cards that just are a little too inefficient. Angel of the Ruins, 7 mana 5/7. I think paying 9 mana to get a 5/7 and a 1/1 and exile 4 artifacts and enchantments is just not good. Circuit Mender, 5 mana for a 2/3 and a 1/1. It's a gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. If they leave, it's not good. Cloud Blazer, 7 mana, draw 4, not good. 7 mana instants to maybe draw cards, not good. Inferno Titan, this one's a little hard to justify, but I think that if the copy you made wasn't a 1/1, I would like it. But paying 8 mana for a 6/6 and a 1/1 to deal 3 damage divided twice is just, I just don't think it's that good. Overseer, once again, 5 mana, draw 2, not good. Restoration Angel, this is like the only blink effect in the whole deck. We're not a blink deck. We're this like low power matters deck, so I don't understand why this thing is here. At first I thought, oh, it's because you can offspring a creature again, but no, you can't, because offspring is specifically a cast trigger, so you can't even do that. Shield Broker, I see the idea here. You pay 7 and then you steal 2 creatures. The problem is that you only steal them for as long as they have the shield counters that this thing gives them, which I think is actually very easy to actually play around and just break very easily. This thing is gonna steal a creature for, I don't know, 2 turns maybe before they get it back, and also it's non-commander, which is just boring. That's so boring. Stolen by the Fae, in my experience, removal you pay extra for to get upside with is just typically not good. If this thing was an instant, I'd like it, but as a sorcery and having to pay X equal to the creature's mana value, if you want to bounce a 6 drop, you gotta pay 6 into this. Sure, you get X 1/1 fairies after that, but I'd much rather just have a cheap actual counter or kill spell The deck does not struggle at all to make massive boards of 1/1s. You don't need this at all. Engineer, why is it here? Cut a deal, why is it here? You're in 3 colors. You don't need to be playing this like strange 3 mana divination that also gives your opponents a free card. And then time wipe we cut because I think the deck just had one too many wipes that you don't need. Between like Dusk, Martial Coup, and Calamity Ascenders, I don't think you need a 4th wipe with time wipe only letting you save 1 creature. Moving on to upgrades, we just add a lot of cards that are much more efficient what they do. We cut a lot of cards that draw you cards, so let's add in cards that draw you cards for way less mana. Rumor Gatherer, if you clone this and you were able to trigger Alliance twice a turn, multiple turns, you can scry 1 and draw 2 cards every turn. Loyal Drake can draw you 2 cards every turn on combat for 5 mana, which is nuts. Cemetery Illuminator lets you cast spells on top of your deck. It's graveyard hate, it lets you cast spells on top of your library or play lands. It's just a really nice, cool synergy piece. Loyal Apprentice, make 2 1/1 Thopters every turn for 4 mana. Witty Roastmaster, a Gate Instigator is easily one of this deck's best creatures. The fact that it has Offspring and Zinnia gives Instigator Offspring again means you can pay 6 mana into this thing to get 3 creatures that are Impact Tremors. I think being able to pay 5 mana to get 2 Impact Tremors is also a very big deal. Being able to ping your opponents down quickly with lots of cards that make you massive boards will very easily win you the game. And I honestly just think it's a just a good finisher with Zinnia. Werefox Bodyguard allows you to just exile creatures. It's got Flash as well, so you can flash this in and pay 2 to Offspring it, exiling 2 creatures. And also, it's a fox, so it's on flavor for Bloomburrow, which honestly is reason enough. Mentor the Meek, just great card draw. Volatile Stormdrake, you can get like 8 energy with this thing. Plus, there's just a lot of commanders nowadays that cost 4 and are just in that sweet spot of 4 mana. Volatile Stormdrake, you cast it, you pay 2 and clone it, and you can probably steal like 2 commanders and give your opponents these worthless 3/2s and 1/1 flyers. It's just a really great removal spell in this deck. Counterspell, Model the Mixture, and Negate all serve as just really solid, efficient removal spells. This deck had 0 counterspells out of the box, which I think is wrong. You're in blue. You are the only color in the game that can actually hard stop instants and sources on stack. You should absolutely be utilizing the boon you have of blue by running at least some counterspells. Swords of Plowshares, and then Gamble is just a nice, solid tutor that lets you go and grab one of your finishers. Most of these other upgrades are cheap or even less than $1. Gamble is the only somewhat expensive upgrade you have here. It's worth it. It's a good tutor. It's very solid. 1 mana, grab any card you want. If you're a little unlucky, you'll discard a card you grabbed. I promise you it's worth it. And with the amount of cards you'll draw in this deck, the chance of you discarding the card you tutored for is slim to none. And then finally we have a Chancellor of the Forge. 7 mana for a 5/5. It's got a pregame effect. You can get a 1/1 Goblin with haste for free on turn 0 if you want. The reason you play this is the fact you can Offspring it. When Chancellor of the Forge ETBs, you put X 1/1 Goblins with haste on the field, where X is the number of creatures you control. So let's say you have 6 creatures, right? Plus 1 when Chancellor enters. The first Chancellor will make 7 1/1 Goblins, but then the second Offspring Chancellor will enter, which will see 15 other creatures. So you get a total of like 21 Goblins for 9 mana. Combine that with like a copied Witty Roastmaster or a copied a Gate Instigator, you will just win the game on the spot. This deck is honestly really sweet once you take away all the bad lands and put in some simple basics, and you take away all of the overcosted draw effects. The deck is really solid. Playing this like 1 power Matters deck is a really unique take on tokens I have not seen before, and the deck is just really fun that way. Next up, we have Peace Offering, led by Miss Bumbleflower. This deck is like actually kind of cracked for some reason, which is kind of nuts, but let's cover Miss Bumbleflower first. Let's get her out of the way. Miss Bumbleflower, 1 green, white, blue for a legendary 1/5 rabbit citizen creature with vigilance. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. put a +1/+1 counter to our creature, it gains flying until end of turn. If this is the second time this ability is resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. I think your commander letting you draw 2 cards potentially every turn is honestly kind of nuts. Like, I know you give your opponent card draw, I know that, but the prospect of being able to get a divination's worth of cards every turn is nuts to me. Plus, you're getting a +1/+1 counter and temporary flying on your creatures as well, which is even more insane. This deck at its core is a group hug deck. There are cards that benefit the whole table, like Selvax for Return, giving every player card draw and ramp. There is Temper Discovery and Temper Bunnies, 2 cards that let your opponents do things, and the more opponents that do take the thing, you get more of said thing. Quain, Itinerant Meddler, Bugs Bunny, lets everyone draw cards. Awesome, great, love to see it. And then you got enchantments like Gear Per Orrery and Rites of Flourishing, letting everyone just play extra lands, with Flourishing also letting you draw some cards. And then there's also some selective group hug with like Tenuous Truce, letting only you and one other opponent get extra benefits as opposed to the whole table. One thing that I think is actually really cool about this deck is that you give your opponents the tools necessary to keep playing the game, but you also have spells that give you benefits whenever your opponents do just play the game in general. For example, Forgotten Ancient. Whenever a player casts a spell, you put a counter on Forgotten Ancient. There's actually quite a few cards in this deck that are like this. Sunscorch Region, Mana Gorger Hydra. There's several cards in here that just get stronger the more spells are being cast just in general, which is a really nice way to do synergy. This deck is honestly really well built. There's very few cards in here that are obvious cuts besides the group hug effects, which I'm not going to cut because at its core, that's what this deck is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a very political deck. You're supposed to make friends and turn your friends against other table before going for the win yourself. And also, like, you don't have to win with combat damage at all. This deck has not 1, not 2, but 3 alternate win conditions with Triskaidekaphile, 20-Toed Toad, and Simic Ascendancy. I feel like precons almost never run alternate win cons, and yet somehow this one managed to get 3 of them, which is nuts to me. I think Bumbleflower could honestly be just a really solid control commander of all things, which I know might sound a little weird to say considering the fact that she gives players card draw, but there's lots of cards in white that punish your opponents whenever they do draw lots of cards. So ironically, you could actually use your opponent drawing cards to your advantage, believe it or not. She just seems like this really cool take on a commander. Plus, I believe this is the first group hug deck we've ever had. I know there was the Silver Quill Precon in Strixhaven with Brina the Demagogue. That deck didn't really feel like group hug to me, more so just like political gain to get an advantage, more so than just wanting to give everyone goodies all the time. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious by now. Miss Bumbleflower gets a resounding based from me. Gotta say, big fan of her. Now let's see what a Peace Offering upgrade might look like. So as you can see, we actually only cut 10 cards in this deck. We cut the 3 Thriving Lands because they're just bad, and once again added just 1 of each basic because basics are not that bad. They're fine, play them. You don't have to be like restricted to like only 6 basics and 3 card decks. You don't gotta do that. We cut Baird, Steward of Argive, because just why is this guy here? Ghostly Prison, Propaganda are right there, and they cost less mana. Baird is a more expensive, worse Ghostly Prison, and for some reason he's here. I don't know why. Hoofprints of a Stag, it's just a little too inefficient. Paying 2 and then 3 to get a single 4/4 white elemental, plus you can only remove counters on your turn, so it's kind of eh. Jolly Gerbils, I actually really liked the idea of this card at first when I read it, but then when I actually went through the deck, there was only like 6 cards that ever mentioned giving gifts, so they were a pretty easy cut as well. Martial Impetus, this is the only impetus in the deck and the only card in general that seems to actually force combat to some degree. I just don't think it's necessary, and if anything just serves to make someone dislike you. And then we have Purge Protection, which is what if you wanted to Purge Protection, but God said 3 extra mana, give an opponent an extra turn, but you get some 2/2 flyers. You would not play that. You would not play that. That's terrible. And then finally, we cut Rites of Flourishing and Gear for Orrery. Honestly, you might disagree with these cuts, and I wouldn't blame you, because my philosophy could totally be wrong here. But in my experience, the correct way to build Group Hug is to only give your opponents extra card draw. Don't actually ramp them. You want their hands to reach a point of overflow where they're drawing too many cards to cast. That way, they're kind of sitting there being like, God, I don't know what to cast, and that way they're actually discarding most of the cards they draw due to just hand size restrictions. Meanwhile, you are able to cast all your cards because you built the deck properly and are able to, you know, just properly account for all the cards you're gonna get. I cut Orrery and Rites of Flourishing because they let your opponents play extra lands and ramp, which I don't think is what you really want to be doing. Giving them card draw is fine, awesome, lovely. Don't give them ramp. Don't give them mana. Don't do that. Moving on to additions. Ghostly Prison and Solitary Confinement. Solitary Confinement, you should, like, just be untouchable as long as this thing's on the field. You discard 1 card every turn to give a draw step. Guess what? Bubble Flower draws you 2 cards every turn, assuming you can cast spells. Not to mention, there's all the group draw just streamed out the deck. So, Solitary Confinement is just a slam dunk here. Ghostly Prison is just, again, bared, but good. We added a counter spell and a negate because, once again, the deck was just a little light on counter spells. All it had was an Offer You Can't Refuse and Long River's Pull. And I think you might want to, honestly, maybe even go a little heavier on counter magic because this deck does seem to want to win through a selection of alternate win cons. So honestly, I wouldn't even blame you if you wanted to go even heavier on counter magic. Aetherize is a great way to punish that one player in the pod who keeps trying to tell everyone, no guys, no, you gotta attack a group hug player. Don't fall for their schemes, their political niceness. You gotta attack them. There's gonna be that one dude who's actually good and smart at Commander, and it's gonna be like, no guys, you should attack the group hug player. You didn't ask for these free things. You can just attack them for no reason and get no repercussions. That one dude, give him a nice fat Aetherize and remove the board. Just their board, not everyone else's, because, you know, they're the ones making your life hard, not everyone else. Council's Judgment, once again, just serves as a great way to hate on that one dude who is actually good at Commander and realizes that they should just attack you because you're making the game chaotic. Yes, Miss Bumbleflower, I will, in fact, remove that one dude's other permanents for no reason, simply due to the fact that you asked me to. You got it. And then we add a Approach of Second Sun as a 4th alternate win con because we already had 3. You might as well go harder and play 4. This deck's awesome. It seems to be very well built. There's very few obvious cards here that are like, man, I don't like that. The deck is just really well put together. Like, it's a really unique take on Group Hug where it's Group Hug, but the designers found a way to make it so that you get extra benefits for group hugging, which is awesome. That's so cool. Bumbleflower is awesome. Great Commander, and I look forward to playing against this at my LGS. Last but not least, we have Squirreled Away, led by Hazel of the Root Bloom. Squirreled Away is a deck that is advertised as a squirrel/token deck, but you'll see as we go that the squirrel part is not as big of an emphasis you would think. Hazel honestly might be one of the most pushed commanders I've ever seen. 2 black-green for a 3/5 legendary squirrel druid creature. You can tap her and pay 2 life to tap X untapped token to control and add X mana in any combination of colors. So keep in mind, it's any untapped tokens, not just creatures. So food, treasure, clues, all those shenanigans, right? But wait, there's more. At beginning of your end step, create a token as a copy of target token control. If that token is a squirrel, instead create 2 tokens that are copies of it. So already when I see this deck and take into account the fact that the deck's name is literally Squirreled Away, my initial thought is, wow, this is gonna be a really pushed squirrel deck with lots of squirrel synergies. It's gonna be like 25 plus squirrels. There's gonna be a huge emphasis on squirrels, and I'm gonna be able to go super wide with squirrels and make lots of squirrels and make lots of mana with said squirrels, and it's gonna be this like just so many squirrels, right? I only counted 17 cards in this deck that even mentioned squirrels, which is less than I expected. The deck seems to be more so focused on this, like, I guess the best phrase is like vermin tribal. There's cards that care about rats, like Ogre Slumlord, what makes rats creatures die. There's Arasta of the Endless Web, which makes spider tokens. There's Chittering Witch, which makes rat tokens as well. Like, the deck just doesn't have as much as an emphasis on squirrels as I thought there would be. Considering the fact that the deck's name was Squirreled Away. Yes, Hazel can make lots of squirrels by copying squirrel tokens, but it still was just, like, not as much as I thought it was going to be. And I think lots of people bought this deck thinking that they were going to get this really solid, like, nearly finished package of squirrels. So, I think the best way to upgrade this for sure is to definitely try and lend the deck more so towards that squirrel kindred archetype. But for the most part, the deck just wants to make lots of different tokens of several types. There's Academy Manufacturer, letting you make clues, food, and treasures if you create one or the other. Bellageos makes pests, or Asta makes spiders. There's cards that give you synergies just for having lots of tokens. For example, Second Harvest, you can copy all your tokens no matter what. Gorman's Talent gives you a benefit for gaining life. Mostly with food. So the deck is more so this, like, token variance deck with a squirrel sub-theme. I think it's pretty cut and dry here. Hazel gets easy based from me. Tapping lots of tokens and the fact that you're not restricted to specifically creature tokens or artifact tokens means that you can build Hazel in a lot of different ways. You honestly don't even have to go into the squirrel archetype at all. You could totally just do, like, I don't know, like, just clone demon tokens, right? Like, you don't have to even build into the squirrel archetype if you don't want to. Then, like, the deck is still well built. Like, the deck still does its thing. I just think that there's gonna be some people out there who are very disappointed that squirrels don't play a bigger role in the deck. That's all. Besides that, the deck is really well built. It's a very solid black-green token strategy, and Hazel herself is just really strong. She can make so much mana, as I'm sure everyone wants. Let's upgrade this deck and try and make it more squirrel focused. Getting into our cuts here, we have 15 of them. Mostly just cutting lots of cards that just either are a little too expensive or just don't make squirrels. Arasta doesn't make squirrels. Bind of the Old Gods, 4 mana Maelstrom Pulse that also ramps through a forest. Don't think it's that good. Cash Grab, it is absolutely possible to whiff with this thing, and you might get a food if you control a squirrel. Not very good. Casualties of War, 6 mana, blow up 4 things because the chance of someone having a Planeswalker is very low. Meh. I think it's meh. Chittering Witch, once again, doesn't make squirrels. Maskwood Nexus, again, I tend to not like this effect in this deck. Like, we're cutting a lot of non-squirrel creatures just to put in more squirrels, so the synergy of making non-squirrels into squirrels becomes even less obvious here, since we're just gonna have more cards that just are squirrels. So I don't think there's any reason to have it, really, after this upgrade. Moonstone Eulogist, Ogre Slumlord, Woe Strider, once again, all cards that make tokens, but they aren't squirrels. Blade Crafter, I just don't think this effect is really needed in this deck. Not the worst cut in the world. If you want to keep it, it's probably fine. Poison Tip Archer, 4 mana for a Zulaport Cutthroat that doesn't actually gain you life is pretty bad in my opinion. Prosperous Innkeeper, you don't need life gain. You don't need it. I just don't think necessary. Putrefy, 3 mana removal that only hits artifacts or creatures is a little too expensive for my tastes. If it was a Maelstrom Pulse, I'd like it, but guess what? It's already in the main deck, so you can only have so many of those effects. Scavenger Spider, once again, 4 mana to blow up an island permanent and sack creature, just a little too much. Woe Strider doesn't make squirrels, and I don't think you really need the free sack outlet. Zulaport Cutthroat, again, not the worst card in the world. If you want to keep it, it's probably fine. But the deck already has a Nadir's Nightblade, which triggers for every token you have that leaves the field. Which I think overall is just better and happens to be a happy middle ground between the Archer and the Cutthroat. Honestly, like, you could totally keep some of these cards and you'd probably be fine. This deck is very well built compared to the Animated Army deck and the Fairy Matters deck. Same with Peace Offering. I would say Squirreled Away and Peace Offering are overall just much more well put together compared to Family Matters and Animated Army. Moving on to upgrades, once again, we are doing our best to try and make this deck a lot more Squirrel focused. Starting off with all our Squirrel cards. Bone Cache Overseer, 1 black mana for a 1/1. This thing is basically just a 1 mana Phyrexian Arena as long as you can consistently sack food or forage, which I don't believe this deck should have any problem doing. And even if you can't draw a card every turn, it's 1 mana. You paid 1 mana, which is next to nothing for investment wise. Bramble Sovereign, guess what? Bramble Sovereign lets you make tokens of your non-token squirrels, which then you can begin to make 2 copies of every turn with Hazel. The synergy there is nuts. And also, Bramble Sovereign, look at it. It's a tree person. Squirrels like trees. Flavor win. Camellia Seed Miser is a solid, efficient squirrel anthem that gives your squirrels menace, puts counters on other squirrels, and is a squirrel producer for whenever you sack foods. She is just everything you possibly want in a squirrel in this deck. Nut Collector is a very, very strong squirrel anthem and a squirrel producer for 6 mana. Unfortunately, is a 1/1. Kind of wish he was a little bigger in terms of toughness, but he's still just a really solid card. Osteomancer Adept is basically an Underworld Breach in black that also just happens to be a squirrel. And also, you can sack foods rather than having to exile 3 cards to your graveyard. So, again, overall, just good things to the deck here. Squirrel Mob can just be a nice, giant, fat squirrel. Kind of wish it had Trample, but again, Squirrel Kindred, you know. Thorn Vault Forager is a squirrel that can ramp you for 2, and can also let you pay for to tutor for squirrels, so you can go and grab, you know, whatever squirrel is best for the occasion, like Valley Rockcaller, which can drain everyone for a massive amount once you hit a critical mass of squirrels. Underworld Hermit is basically like Gray Merchant of Asphodel, but for squirrels in a way, where it's like you make just a crap ton of 1/1 squirrels equal to Merchant of Black as opposed to draining. Just a massive way to get a quick, easy board full of squirrels. Chatter of the Squirrel, Verdict Command, and Squirrel Sanctuary are nice, just cheap cards that let you make squirrels, so you can begin making 2 of them every turn with Hazel. With Squirrel Sanctuary letting you actually make multiple as the game goes, assuming you're able to pay that 1 to get back to your hand and cast it again. And Verdict Command gives you a bit of utility with some graveyard hate, life gain, and or being able to counter the ability of a Planeswalker. Pillow Evolution lets everyone make copies of tokens in play, so if you have 6 squirrels, guess what? You get to make 6 more squirrels, and then guess what? You can flash it back for 7, so you go from 6 to 12 to 24. This thing is just a really good way to close out the game once you assemble a solid number of squirrels, letting you transfer that solid number of squirrels to a massive board of squirrels. Necrotic Hex is a board wipe that, in a way, kind of actually is a upgrade for you, because you're likely sacking a bunch of 1/1 squirrels and getting a bunch of 2/2 zombies instead, so you kind of turn squirrels into 2/2s as opposed to 1/1s, and for your opponents, sacking 6 creatures probably means losing the whole board, whereas for you, it means you're probably just losing some squirrel tokens. So it's a nice way to clean your opponent's boards clear while still managing to have a board of your own. And then finally, we have Fey Offering. This deck should have absolutely no problem managing to cast a creature spell and a non-creature spell return, and the payoff being a clue token, a food token, and a treasure token every turn is nuts. It's card draw, ramp, and this deck actually really cares about food. So even the food token, where most decks would consider it to be like a, whatever, the food is not that important, this deck actually cares about it, because there's lots of cards that just care about food, mostly through all the forge effects. Like I said, this deck is honestly just really well built. You honestly could even maybe keep a few of the cards I cut if you want. If you wanted to make Hazel more squirrel focused, more squirrel centric, this is your guide. Deck is just really cool. And also, you can just kill people with squirrels. That's awesome. That's hilarious. All in all 4 of these decks are base in terms of Commander's design. I do kind of wish Animated Army and Family Matters was a little more concisely built. I mean, we had to cut 20 cards for Army and Family Matters as opposed to the 10 and 15 we cut for Squirreled Away and Peace Offering. So, I think that goes to show that those decks are kind of struggling in terms of deck design. Not to mention how Family Matters just has a horrible fan base for some reason. Like, it's only Zinnia's deck that seems to have a glaringly bad mana base for some reason. Like, Animated Army, Peace Offering, Squirreled Away are all fine. Peace Offering did not have 15 tap lands like the Zinnia deck did, which is very strange to me. The only deck I'd be wary of is the Bellow deck. If I do end up buying that Precon, I'd probably just end up cutting 40 plus cards to make Wilds to the face commander, honestly. But yeah, no. Thank you all for watching. Bloomburrow is a awesome set. These Precons are all good, minus a few glaring issues here and there. But yeah, just go buy them, go have fun. I hope these upgrade guides on this episode of Based Or Cringe help you. And I hope you enjoy your Precons that you will soon buy, or maybe not if you don't like them. But hopefully you do. So that's you know.